The company party was in full swing. The ballroom sparkled with bright chandeliers, and the sound of music mixed with laughter and the clinking of glasses. People were dancing, talking, and celebrating. It was a night full of excitement and joy, or at least it seemed that way. Michael stood near the bar, holding a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. His eyes searched the room until they stopped on Laura, his wife. She was dancing in the center of the floor, her navy blue dress flowing as she twirled. She looked happy, too happy. But it wasn't Michael who made her smile like that. It was Daniel, the man she had told him was just a colleague. Michael's stomach tightened as he watched them. Their hands were joined, their movements in perfect sync. The way they looked at each other told him everything he needed to know. Laura's eyes sparkled, and her laugh was carefree. It wasn't the smile she gave him anymore. It was something deeper, something she didn't even try to hide. The divorce papers in Michael's pocket felt heavier with each passing second. He had known about her affair for weeks. The late nights at work, the secretive phone calls, the way she had started pulling away. They all made sense now. He tried to hold on, to find the right moment to confront her, but seeing her here with Daniel erased all doubt. Tonight it had to end. Taking a deep breath, Michael walked toward the dance floor. The music was loud, and the crowd was busy laughing and dancing, but everything felt distant to him. Laura didn't notice him at first, lost in her dance with Daniel. When she finally saw him, her smile faded, and her steps slowed. Daniel stopped too, looking uneasy as Michael approached. Michael pulled the envelope from his pocket and held it out to Laura. She froze, staring at him with wide eyes. Slowly, her hands reached for the envelope, trembling as she opened it. She began to read the words, and her face turned pale. "Michael," she whispered, her voice shaky. "Can we talk about this?" "No," he replied firmly, his voice loud enough to be heard over the music. "We've talked enough without saying anything." The color drained from Laura's face. Her legs gave way, and she collapsed to the floor, fainting in front of everyone. Gasps filled the room as people stopped to see what was happening. Daniel dropped to his knees beside her, calling her name, but she didn't respond. Michael didn't wait to hear what anyone had to say. He turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving her there with the divorce papers in her hand. The whispers and murmurs of the crowd followed him, but he didn't look back. Outside, the cool night air hit him, but it didn't calm the storm inside. The pain of her betrayal still burned, but at least now he was done pretending. Inside, the music played on, but nothing about the party would be the same. For Laura and Daniel, the perfect night had shattered. For Michael, it was the start of something new. Michael and Laura had always seemed like the perfect couple to everyone who knew them. They lived in a beautiful home in the suburbs, complete with a manicured lawn and picture-perfect decor. Michael was a hard-working accountant, known for his calm and reliable nature. Laura, on the other hand, was a marketing coordinator for a large firm. She was bright, charming, and always carried herself with elegance. Together, they looked like the kind of couple who had it all. A strong marriage, successful careers, and a peaceful life. But behind closed doors, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. Their mornings started with routine conversations that felt more like scripted exchanges. Michael would prepare coffee while Laura came downstairs, always in a rush, checking her phone or finishing her makeup. They exchanged polite smiles, but something was missing. The warmth, the spark, the closeness. They had been replaced by a growing distance neither of them wanted to name. Michael noticed it first in small ways. Laura began staying late at work more often, citing deadlines and demanding projects. When she came home, she seemed preoccupied, distracted, and barely interested in their usual dinner conversations. Her phone was always close by, and she became protective of it in a way that raised his suspicions. She'd step out of the room to take calls, her voice hushed, and if Michael asked who it was, her answers were vague. "It's just work," she'd say, brushing it off with a quick smile. But the smile didn't reach her eyes. As the weeks went on, the signs became harder to ignore. Laura started dressing up more than usual, even on days when she claimed she'd just be in meetings all afternoon. She wore perfume he hadn't seen her use in years, and seemed to spend more time on her hair, and makeup than she ever had for their date nights. Michael tried to push the doubts aside, telling himself it was just his imagination. But the uneasy feeling in his gut wouldn't go away. One evening, as Laura was getting ready for yet another late night at work, Michael decided to check her phone. He hesitated, knowing it was a breach of trust, but his instincts screamed at him to look. Her phone was locked, but the notification preview was enough. Messages from someone named Daniel, with phrases like, "Can't wait to see you tonight," and "Last night was incredible." His heart sank. Michael didn't confront her immediately. He needed to be sure before he acted. Over the next few days, he paid closer attention. He noticed how her mood seemed to lift whenever she was on her phone, how she avoided his questions about her day, and how she always seemed to have an excuse to leave the house. The truth finally hit him one evening when he decided to pick her up from work unannounced. Laura had told him she'd be staying late, so he parked his car in the lot and waited. As the minutes passed, his heart raced. Finally, he saw her exit the building, but she wasn't alone. Daniel, a well-dressed man Michael recognized from photos Laura had shown him of her office events, was with her. Michael watched as the two walked together to Daniel's car. Their conversation seemed light, filled with laughter. And then Laura did something that made Michael's blood run cold. She reached out and brushed Daniel's arm with a familiarity that spoke volumes. Daniel leaned in, whispered something to her, and she smiled. A smile Michael hadn't seen in years. It was the kind of smile she used to reserve for him. When Daniel placed a hand on Laura's waist and pulled her in for a brief hug, Michael couldn't look anymore. He felt his chest tighten, a mix of anger and heartbreak rising within him. He wanted to storm out of the car, to demand an explanation, but he held himself back. Instead, he gripped the steering wheel, his mind racing. This wasn't the place or time. He needed a plan, something that would expose the truth and make her understand the weight of her betrayal. Driving home that night, Michael felt numb. The image of Laura with Daniel replayed in his mind, over and over. He thought about their life together, the promises they had made, and the love they had shared. How had it come to this? What had he done to deserve this? By the time he pulled into their driveway, the numbness had given way to something sharper, determination. If Laura thought she could betray him and keep it hidden, she was wrong. He wouldn't confront her in private, where she could make excuses or deny what he had seen. No, this needed to happen in a way she'd never forget. As Michael sat alone in the dark, the plan began to take shape. He would wait for the right moment, the perfect time to reveal everything. And what better stage than the upcoming company party, where Laura and Daniel would least expect it. It was fitting, he thought, that the place where she had built her lies would also be the place where the truth would come crashing down. For the first time in weeks, Michael felt a sense of clarity. The betrayal had shattered his heart, but now it fueled his resolve. Laura had made her choice, and soon she would face the consequences. The house was silent when Michael walked in that night, the only sound coming from the faint ticking of the clock in the living room. The weight of the party still lingered on his shoulders, the whispers, Laura's fainting, and the shocked faces of their colleagues. He dropped his keys on the hall table and exhaled deeply. The night wasn't over, not yet. Laura was sitting on the couch, still in her navy blue dress, though it looked crumpled now. Her face was pale, her makeup smudged from crying. When she saw Michael, she stood up, her lips trembling as she spoke. "Michael, I can explain." He didn't respond. Instead, he walked past her into the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. His silence was heavier than any words he could have spoken. Laura followed him, her voice desperate. "Please, just listen to me. I never meant for it to get this far. It wasn't supposed to happen." Michael turned, his eyes cold. "Not supposed to happen? Laura, you've been lying to me for months. You were dancing with him tonight, in front of everyone, like I didn't exist. So don't stand here and tell me it wasn't supposed to happen." Tears streamed down her face as she stepped closer, her hands clasped together. "I made a mistake. I know I did. But it didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" Michael interrupted, his voice rising. "You've been sneaking around with him, laughing with him, sharing things you haven't shared with me in years. And now, you're telling me it didn't mean anything? Don't insult me, Laura. For a moment, she froze, as if she didn't know how to respond. Then, as if unable to hold it in any longer, she sank onto a chair, her sobs filling the room. He used me, Michael. I didn't know what I was getting into. He made me believe I was special, that I deserved more, and I fell for it. Michael folded his arms, his expression unreadable. What are you talking about? Laura looked up at him, her face red and streaked with tears. It wasn't just about the affair. Daniel, he convinced me to sign some papers at work. He said they were routine just to help him with a project. But it wasn't routine, Michael. It was fraud. Michael's jaw tightened. What do you mean, fraud? He manipulated me, she whispered, her voice trembling. He used my position to approve fake contracts and move money around. I didn't realize what he was doing until it was too late. He threatened me, told me I'd lose my job if I didn't keep helping him. I was scared. The room fell into an uneasy silence. Michael stared at her, his mind racing. The betrayal was bad enough, but now this? She had not only broken his trust, but also dragged herself into something far darker. So, let me get this straight, Michael said slowly, his tone sharp. You didn't just betray me. You helped him commit a crime. I didn't want to. Laura cried, her voice breaking. I was trapped. I didn't know how to get out. Michael shook his head, pacing the kitchen. You had a choice, Laura. You always had a choice. But you chose him. You chose lies over honesty. You put everything, your job, your marriage, your life, at risk for a man who was using you. Laura stood, reaching out to him. Michael, please. I'm sorry. I know I made terrible mistakes, but I can fix this. We can fix this. Just give me another chance. Michael turned to face her. His expression hardened. Fix this? Laura, there's nothing left to fix. Our marriage is over. It ended the moment you decided he was more important than us. Her sobs grew louder, but Michael remained firm. I can't stay here anymore. I need space and I need time. You've destroyed everything we built, and I can't forgive that. Not now. Maybe not ever. Laura dropped to her knees, clutching the hem of his shirt. Please, don't leave me. I love you, Michael. I don't know what I'd do without you. Michael gently pulled away from her grip, his voice calm but final. You should have thought about that before. I can't keep pretending, Laura. It's over. He walked upstairs, leaving her crying in the kitchen. The next morning, he packed a bag and left the house without saying another word. As he closed the door behind him, he felt a strange mix of pain and relief. The life he thought he knew was gone, but so was the weight of pretending everything was okay. This was the start of something new, though he didn't yet know what that would be. The fallout from the company party was swift and brutal. By the next morning, whispers had turned into full-blown rumors, and soon the truth about Laura and Daniel's affair was the talk of the office. Laura returned to work only to be met with cold stares and hushed conversations that stopped as she walked past. Her carefully built professional reputation, once a source of pride, crumbled in an instant. It wasn't long before the company's internal investigation uncovered the fraudulent activity tied to Daniel's projects. The contracts Laura had signed at his request were the smoking gun. As the evidence piled up, it became clear that Laura had been a key part of the scheme, even if unwittingly. Her boss called her into a meeting and handed her a termination letter, his expression a mix of anger and disappointment. This isn't just about your job, Laura, he said. The authorities are involved now. I suggest you prepare for the legal consequences. Laura left the office with her belongings in a box, tears streaming down her face. The job she had worked so hard for, the career she had built over years, was gone. But worse than losing her job was losing the respect of her colleagues and friends. No one returned her calls. Invitations to events dried up. She had become a pariah, her name synonymous with betrayal and scandal. Daniel's fate was no better. The company's investigation revealed that he had masterminded the entire fraud scheme, using Laura and others to cover his tracks. When the authorities came for him, he tried to deny everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. He was arrested, and the news of his crimes spread quickly. Headlines labeled him a fraud and a cheat, and his family didn't hesitate to cut ties. His wife filed for divorce immediately, taking their children and leaving him to face the consequences alone. His friends, once charmed by his charisma, disappeared when his reputation was destroyed. In just a few weeks, Daniel went from a respected professional to a disgraced criminal, sitting in a jail cell with nothing left. For Laura, life became a lonely and painful routine. She moved out of the home she had shared with Michael and into a small apartment on the outskirts of town. It was all she could afford after losing her job and facing mounting legal fees. The space was bare, cold, and quiet, a stark contrast to the warm, comfortable life she once knew. She spent her days reflecting on the choices that had brought her to this point. The guilt was unbearable. She thought about Michael, about the love they had once shared, and about how she had destroyed it all. She thought about her career, the respect she had earned, and how she had thrown it away for a man who had only used her. She thought about the lies, the deception, and the moment it all came crashing down at the party. Each day felt heavier than the last. She tried to reach out to Michael once, sending him a long message apologizing and asking for forgiveness. But he didn't respond. She couldn't blame him. What could she say that would undo the damage she had done? Laura spent her nights staring out the window, watching the world go on without her. She knew she had no one to blame but herself. Her loneliness was her punishment, and she accepted it, though it didn't make the pain any easier to bear. Every so often, she thought about Daniel. She hated him for what he had done to her, but she hated herself even more for letting it happen. She had let her desire for attention and excitement blind her to the truth, and now she was paying the price. As the weeks turned into months, Laura realized that she had lost everything that mattered: her job, her reputation, and, most painfully, Michael. The man who had loved her through it all was gone, and she knew she would never get him back. She could only hope that one day, she might find a way to rebuild her life, even if it was a shadow of what it once was. For now, all she had was her regret and the silence that came with it. Michael stood in the middle of the empty living room, the last of his boxes stacked near the door. The house, once full of life and memories, now felt hollow. Every corner reminded him of Laura, of the laughter they had shared and the betrayal that had torn it all apart. He exhaled deeply, letting the weight of it settle in. This was his final goodbye to the life they had built together. The past few weeks had been a blur of emotions. Moving out was harder than he imagined, not because of the physical effort, but because of the memories attached to everything he touched. The framed photos, the furniture, even the smell of the place, it all felt like ghosts of a life he no longer recognized. But Michael knew he needed a fresh start, a place where he could heal and begin again. His new apartment was small but comfortable. It was quiet, with just enough space for him to find peace. The first few nights were the hardest. Alone in the silence, the pain of betrayal crept back in. He replayed Laura's words, her actions, and the moment he handed her the divorce papers. The anger and sadness were still there, but so was something else, a determination to move forward. Michael started focusing on himself for the first time in years. He picked up old hobbies he'd forgotten about, like photography and hiking. He went to the gym not just to stay fit but to clear his mind. Slowly, he began to feel like himself again. The wounds were still there, but they were healing one day at a time. One afternoon, Michael stopped by a local coffee shop after a long hike. As he waited for his coffee, a woman's voice broke his thoughts. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" He looked up to see a woman standing there, smiling warmly. Her name was Emily, and there was a kindness in her eyes that immediately put him at ease. "No, go ahead," Michael said, gesturing to the seat across from him. Emily was an architect in town for a project. Their conversation started casually. Small talk about the weather and the city, but it quickly turned into something deeper. Michael found himself laughing for the first time in weeks, and it surprised him how easy it felt to talk to her. Emily didn't pry or push. She just listened, and her presence felt light and comforting. Over the next few weeks, they bumped into each other a few more times at the same coffee shop. Each time, Their conversations grew longer, and Michael started to look forward to seeing her. Emily was thoughtful and understanding, but more importantly, she didn't see him as someone broken. She saw him as someone worth knowing. One evening, after grabbing coffee, Emily asked, "So, what's next for you?" Michael paused, thinking about her question. "I'm not sure," he admitted, "but for the first time in a while, I feel like there might actually be a next." Emily smiled. "That's a good place to start." As the weeks turned into months, Michael began to trust again. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when the past threatened to pull him back. But Emily's presence reminded him that not everyone was out to hurt him, that life could still be full of good people and good moments. One day, Michael brought Emily a small bouquet of flowers. When he handed it to her, she laughed. "Flowers? How romantic," she teased. Michael smiled. "Let's just say I'm learning how to start over." For the first time in a long time, Michael felt hope. The betrayal he had experienced would always leave a mark, but it no longer defined him. He had found the strength to rebuild, and with Emily, he saw the possibility of a future filled with trust and happiness. And that's the story of Michael, Laura, and the painful road that betrayal carved into their lives. Michael's journey reminds us that betrayal leaves lasting scars, but it also teaches us resilience. While Laura lost everything due to her choices, Michael chose to rebuild, to heal, and to trust again. His story shows that redemption is possible, even after the deepest hurt. But what do you think? Did Laura deserve forgiveness? Was Michael right to move on and leave the past behind? And what about Daniel? Did his downfall feel justified? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you feel about their choices and what you would have done in their place. If the story moved you or made you think, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Unheard Stories. Our goal is to share tales that are not only gripping but also meaningful, showing the consequences of betrayal and the power of starting anew. Thank you for watching, and remember, every choice we make has a ripple effect. Until next time, take care and stay true. See you soon for another story that will leave you thinking.